In a cave in Siberia, scientists found a tiny piece of bone, not even a whole finger, just a fragment, small enough to lose in a coat pocket. And when they finally decoded the DNA hiding inside it, they realized they weren't looking at a Neanderthal, and they weren't looking at us. They'd found a species nobody knew existed, and that was just the beginning of the mystery. Because here's the thing most people never really sit with. For almost the entire history of our genus, being human wasn't a solo act. Right now, there is exactly one kind of human on Earth. You, me, everyone you've ever met. One species spread across every continent, arguing on the internet about pineapple on pizza. That feels normal. It feels like it's always been this way. It has not. For the vast majority of the time humans have existed on this planet, multiple different kinds of us were alive at the same time, sometimes in the same valley, sometimes close enough to make eye contact across a ridge. And then, one by one, they vanished. All of them. Except us. So the real question isn't just, who were they? It's, why aren't they still here, and why are we? And the answer is stranger, messier, and considerably more personal than most people expect. Let's start with what most people think they know, because it's mostly wrong. The popular image is something like a family tree with a single trunk. Apes, then cavemen, then us, one clean line marching toward modern intelligence. That image is comforting. It's also nothing like what actually happened. The real picture looks less like a tree and more like a tangled bush with a dozen branches growing at once, most of them getting cut off before they went anywhere. Homo erectus was walking upright and using fire well over 1 million years before anatomically modern humans existed, and remarkably, some populations of erectus were apparently still alive on the island of Java at roughly the same time modern humans were already painting on cave walls in France. Let that sit for a second. A different species of human may have still been around only tens of thousands of years ago, on the other side of the planet from where we were doing something recognizably close to art, and Erectus wasn't alone in overlapping with us. Neanderthals lived across Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, right up until roughly 40,000 years ago. Homo floresiensis, a tiny hominin nicknamed the Hobbit, because adults stood barely over 1 meter tall, was living on the island of Flores in Indonesia, and some estimates put their disappearance as recently as 50,000 years ago, meaning modern humans and 3-foot-tall relatives may have shared a planet, and possibly even an island chain, at the exact same time. Then there's the group that fragment of bone in Siberia belonged to, the Denisovans, identified almost entirely through DNA rather than a full skeleton, because so little of them physically survived. We don't even know what most of them looked like. We just know they existed, because their genetic fingerprints turned up where nobody expected them. Being the only human species on Earth is not the normal condition of our genus. It's the exception. It's the anomaly. For most of our history, human was a plural noun. Let's actually go back to that cave, because the way this species got discovered is almost stranger than the species itself. In 2008, researchers working in Denisova cave in southern Siberia pulled a small bone fragment out of the ground. It turned out to be part of a finger, belonging to a young girl. At first glance, there was nothing dramatic about it. It didn't look distinct enough from other hominin remains to raise alarms on sight. The real discovery didn't happen in the cave at all. It happened later, in a lab, when researchers sequenced the DNA preserved inside that fragment and compared it against the genomes of Neanderthals and modern humans. The results didn't match either one. Not a variant of us. Not a variant of them. Something else entirely. A distinct lineage that split off from the Neanderthal branch tens of thousands of years earlier, that nobody had ever identified from bones alone, because there essentially weren't enough bones to identify it from. An entire branch of the human family tree, invisible to traditional fossil hunting, only became visible once genetic sequencing got good enough to read the story written inside a. That's not a minor technical footnote. That's a completely new way of discovering what human used to mean. And it means there could be other branches out there right now, sitting in a drawer somewhere, misidentified or simply not yet tested, waiting for the same kind of accident to reveal them. Which raises the obvious next question. If there used to be several of us, what actually happened to the rest? The old simple answer used to be some version of, We were better and they weren't, so we won. Bigger brains, sharper tools, superior communication. Modern humans supposedly just outcompeted everyone else into oblivion, the same way an invasive species pushes out a native one. It's also almost certainly too tidy, and in some places, flatly wrong. Take Neanderthals, because they're the best documented case, and the one where the old story falls apart the fastest. For decades, Neanderthals got cast as the dim, brutish cousins who simply couldn't keep up. Modern research paints a very different picture. Neanderthals controlled fire, made composite tools, hunted large dangerous animals cooperatively, cared for injured group members well enough that individuals survived for years with disabilities that would have been fatal without support, and there's compelling evidence they buried their dead with intention. That is not the profile of a species that lost purely on brain power. Their brains, by volume, were actually slightly larger than ours on average. So if it wasn't pure intelligence, what was it? Here's where the story gets genuinely strange, and where a lot of people's assumptions get quietly rewritten. Neanderthals didn't simply lose a competition and exit stage left. In many cases, they merged with us. Modern humans moving into Neanderthal territory didn't just replace them, they interbred with them, repeatedly, across thousands of years and multiple regions. And we know this with total confidence for one very unglamorous reason. You're carrying the evidence around in your own cells right now. Most people with non-African ancestry carry somewhere between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA. It shows up in things like immune system function, skin and hair traits, even, oddly, in how some people process pain or experience certain moods. Neanderthals didn't just disappear into extinction. Part of them disappeared into us. The Denisovans tell an even weirder version of the same story. We know almost nothing about their appearance. We know almost everything about their genetic legacy. Populations in parts of Asia and Oceania today, particularly in places like Papua New Guinea and the Philippines, carry significant amounts of Denisovan ancestry, in some populations upward of 4 or 5%. One particular Denisovan gene variant, discovered by researchers studying Tibetan populations, turned out to help the body use oxygen efficiently at extreme high altitude. Somewhere in the deep past, a Denisovan and a modern human's descendants ended up carrying a genetic advantage that still helps people survive in the Himalayas today. A relationship between two different kinds of human, forged tens of thousands of years ago, is quietly keeping people alive on mountains right now. So extinction, in the case of at least two of these species, wasn't a clean ending. It was an absorption. They didn't lose so much as get folded in. But not every case was interbreeding. Some of them really did just vanish. And those cases are where the picture gets genuinely troubling, because the leading explanations aren't flattering to us. Take Homo floresiensis, the hobbit species on Flores. Adults stood around a meter tall with brains roughly a third the size of ours, and yet the archaeological evidence found alongside their remains suggests coordinated hunting and stone tool use. A small-bodied, small-brained species doing things that used to be assumed to require a much larger brain to pull off, which quietly upended a lot of assumptions about what brain size actually predicts. Their disappearance lines up suspiciously closely with the arrival of modern humans on the same island. No confirmed hybrid DNA has been found linking floresiensis to us, which suggests this wasn't a merger story like the Neanderthals. Researchers debate multiple explanations: climate shifts, volcanic activity, resource competition with a newly arrived, more populous, more technologically capable species showing up in a place that had been isolated and stable for tens of thousands of years. Isolated island populations, in general, tend to be extremely vulnerable to sudden new competition. And that vulnerability didn't start with humans arriving in the modern era. It appears to have been playing out tens of thousands of years earlier, on a much smaller stage, with much higher stakes. Then there's the broader climate picture, which touches basically every one of these species at some point. The period when Neanderthals disappeared overlaps with intense climate volatility, rapid, repeated swings between warm and brutally cold conditions across Europe. A species that had spent hundreds of thousands of years adapting specifically to a certain kind of cold, stable, mammoth and reindeer-rich landscape suddenly found that landscape shifting under them faster than biological adaptation could keep pace. Meanwhile, modern humans arriving from Africa brought a different survival toolkit: broader diets, more flexible social networks, more elaborate tools, and This part matters more than people usually give it credit for. Larger, more interconnected social groups, capable of trading resources and information across long distances. When the climate turned unpredictable, flexibility mattered more than raw physical strength or even raw brain size. And on flexibility, we may have simply had the edge. There's also a less comfortable theory worth naming directly, because ignoring it would be dishonest. Competition for the same limited resources in the same shrinking habitable zones between two closely related species does not have a peaceful track record anywhere else in the animal kingdom. Some researchers argue that direct conflict, alongside disease transmission between species that had never been exposed to each other's pathogens, likely played some role in accelerating the decline of certain populations. We don't have definitive proof of large-scale violence between modern humans and Neanderthals. We also don't have definitive proof it didn't happen. The honest answer is that extinction was probably not caused by one clean mechanism. It was death by 1,000 disadvantages, stacked on top of each other, during exactly the wrong stretch of unstable climate. And the list doesn't even stop there. In 2013, cavers exploring a nearly inaccessible chamber deep inside a South African cave system, reachable only by squeezing through a gap barely wide enough for a human shoulder, found bones scattered across the floor. Hundreds of them, from at least 15 individuals. The species, later named Homo naledi, had a brain roughly a third the size of ours, hands and shoulders built for climbing, and a mix of primitive and surprisingly modern features that didn't fit neatly into any existing category. What makes naledi genuinely unsettling is the location itself. That chamber isn't a place bodies wash into by accident. Getting there requires deliberate, difficult movement through total darkness. Some researchers argue the simplest explanation is that naledi was intentionally placing its dead there, which would mean a small-brained ancient hominin was engaging in something that looks uncomfortably close to ritual behavior, long before anyone assumed a brain that size was capable of it. We still don't have a confirmed date range that clearly separates naledi from us in time, which means it's entirely possible this species was around far more recently than anyone expected, doing something we used to think only we were capable of. The truth is closer to this. We are the last surviving branch of a much larger, much stranger family tree, and parts of the branches that got cut off are still, quietly, structurally, part of what makes us who we are. Extinction, for at least some of our relatives, wasn't really an ending. It was a merger that looked like an ending from the outside. So the next time someone says humans are the pinnacle of evolution, the single isolated success story of our lineage, you can tell them it's more complicated and considerably weirder than that. There used to be several of us. Different heights, different brow ridges, different tools, different lives, all figuring out how to survive on the same unpredictable planet at the same time. Most of them are gone now, but not entirely gone. Not really. Some of them are still here. In the oxygen processing genes of people living at altitude, in the immune systems of people whose ancestors left Africa tens of thousands of years ago, in a species that only got identified because someone in a Siberian cave found a fragment of bone small enough to fit in the palm of a hand and thought it was worth a second look. We weren't always the only ones. And in a strange, quiet, genetic way, we still aren't.